or if you want to share it. So on that note, I think what I will do is I will turn this over with great delight to Patti Haskell, who is one of our ACP team members, who is going to moderate the panel. Over to you, Patti.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Good morning, everyone. We're absolutely delighted to be here, and we're quite thrilled that Shelley trusts this group of volunteer colleagues to take control of this particular session. Earlier on, as we were talking about our knowledge base, it suddenly occurred to us that 4 of our group are very experienced in hospital care and the kinds of experiences, and so it made a lot of sense for them to share some of their experiences up close and personal, because it gives you a much better sense of what goes on within a hospital environment. So our 4 panelists, as Shelley has said, are all advanced care planning ambassadors. That's the term that we use for our team, and we all volunteer with Hospice Waterloo region. We usually do presentations in the community to service clubs, organizations, church groups, etc. But COVID-19 has prevented us from doing so in person. So we've started to do those presentations using Zoom, and that's worked out not badly, except we're really terrible at getting our timing straight because we like to talk a lot. Today, instead, we're doing our advanced care planning presentation, we're going to share our experiences and advice about being a substitute decision maker in a hospital setting. All 4 of the panelists have worked in hospital settings and have seen firsthand the challenges faced by patients and their substitute decision makers and families when important decisions have to be made, especially if conversations about the patient's values, wishes, beliefs, and care preferences have not taken place before hospitalization occurs. Today, we hope our presentation will highlight 4 things. First, our desire to share our own experiences as neighbors and friends, not as experts, mind you. We see ourselves as a team of encouragers. Secondly, our focus will be on learning about the role of the substitute decision maker. What can our experiences and stories teach us about how to prepare to be a substitute decision maker and increase our knowledge of what the substitute decision maker role should be and could be in a hospital setting? Third, and this is really important, we know that life is unexpected, so let's prepare for it. Advanced care planning and selecting a substitute decision maker is not just something older adults should be doing. Illnesses and accidents can happen at any age. COVID is a great example. It has raised the discussion of how COVID will drive changes in long-term care and in elder care. And we're now seeing with post-COVID patients that there can be post-viral infections that we never thought about before. And finally, the choices that we would make when considering our wishes at end of life can change with each new healthcare experience we have. As our circumstances change, our wishes at different points in our life will change too. Therefore, our conversations about our wishes are not static, and our healthcare experiences will have an impact on our future decisions, wishes, and care preferences. So to begin with, we'd like to do a poll of our participants to sort of set the stage for the next phase of our discussion. So Shelley, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, I am launching the poll. If you can, you should see the poll come up on your screen if you just want to take a minute to answer the questions, and then it will show us the results. Okay, can you see the results? I'll share you the results here. So 80% of those who filled out the poll say that they have confirmed their substitute decision maker. Are you someone else's? Again, another 80% said that. And then, have you ever had to make decisions in the hospital? 60%. So it sounds like we have a great group for discussion. I think everybody has a little bit that they can add. So I'll turn it back over to you, Patti, to get things rolling.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm just going to get rid of the poll on my screen, sorry. Okay, as Shelley indicated, we've selected 4 questions to guide the discussion, which we think will cover the issues that you really need to consider if you are a substitute decision maker for someone and you're in a hospital setting, or if someone else is your substitute decision maker within that setting. For each question, I'm just going to ask 2 of the panelists to reply. As a reminder, Shelley and I will be tracking any questions that you have if you put them in the chat room. At the end of each question, we will stop. We will answer those questions, and then we'll go on to question number 2. I have a stopwatch.
Patti? Sorry, Patti. If I can just add, if people don't know where the chat is, on a laptop, it's at the bottom of the screen. It looks like a conversation bubble. If you come in on your iPad, it's usually where the 3 dots are for more. So if you just click on that, sometimes it's at the top, sometimes it's at the side, just so you know. Sorry, Patti.
Whoops. Something strange has happened here. Just a minute.
Yeah. Diane, can you please turn off your video and your audio at this point, because the panel is going to talk and it's easier for people to follow. So if you can turn off your audio, your video. I don't know why it's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There. Okay.
There we are. That's terrific. Thanks very much, Shelley.
Okay.
So if you try and put those questions in the chat room, Shelley and I will try and track them, and at the end of each question we'll go on. I also have a stopwatch here. We've been kidding about our group and how we all love to tell our stories and get chatty and so on. So I'm going to try and give them a heads up at about the 10-minute mark that it's time to stop, so that we will have time to hear your questions, which I think is important. So question number 1. What does a substitute decision maker need to know about decision making in a hospital setting? And 2 of our panelists, Deb and Lynn, have worked in those settings, and they've prepared some general information about that environment so that you can have a better understanding of what would be important. So I'll turn it over to Deb. I think you were going to start.
Right. So as most of you who have spent any time in a hospital know, they are noisy and active, and you're going to see and hear things that are quite foreign to you. All of this is happening at a time when you're already stressed by the illness of a loved one. And on top of that, you may be in a situation where you're having to make decisions for that loved one about their health care. And during COVID, visiting in hospitals is extremely limited. You may only have communication with the medical team by telephone. Be sure that the team, the healthcare team, has your contact information available to them. They will not leave personal information on an answering machine, but they'll ask you to call back. COVID has put an enormous strain on hospitals in Ontario, but I think they have shown themselves to be creative and agile in adjusting to the demands. For example, in Ottawa in the spring, just in an overnight scenario, an Ottawa hospital moved an entire ward of stable patients into a nearby hotel just to make room for incoming sick patients. Lynn?
You'll likely be given a privacy code when your loved one is admitted to the hospital. You'll be asked for this code before the medical team will give you information. That way they know you are who you say you are, not just the neighbor calling to be nosy and see what's happening. This code should only be given to those who are making decisions for the patient. Don't be handing this code out to everybody so that they can start calling in for information. If there happen to be multiple substitute decision makers for that patient, it's best if you can appoint one of those people as the spokesperson. The spokesperson can call and ask for updates from the medical team and pass this information along to the rest of the team. When you call for information, feel free to turn the speaker on your phone so that another person can hear the nurse's report to you, and it'll be the nurse you're talking to more often than the doctor. Make notes as you receive information. Don't hesitate to write things down. It's hard to remember everything that you're hearing. It's so foreign what you're hearing, and you're stressed. Group emails to the rest of your family and loved ones are an excellent way to pass on the information that you're receiving. That way, everybody gets the same information and they can reread it as many times as they need to. That's what we do in our family when my dad is the one that we care for. And whenever he's in the hospital and things going on, we send out group emails. This turns into a journal so that over the course of the hospitalization, we can refer back to it. You can't possibly be expected to remember everything that happens over those days or possibly weeks. Deb.
Remember, you're not going to be seeing your family doctor or the patient's family doctor in hospital. Patients are cared for by hospitalists and specialists. These doctors may change even on a weekly basis. So there may be several different clinicians involved in patient care during their admission. You might not see any doctor at all for a day or so. Don't worry, they'll be talking to the nursing team. And the nurse caring for your loved one is the one who's responsible for tracking lab work, tests, x-rays, what physio is doing, what procedures have been booked, and whether there's been a substantial change, either an improvement or a decline in the patient's condition. The nurse is the eyes and ears for the doctor, and she or he reports the patient's condition, including changes, directly to the physician. There is a doctor available 24/7. Now, keeping in mind, nurses can't make a diagnosis or give you a prognosis, but they can discuss the patient's condition with you. And frankly, often they can translate for you what the physician has said, because there is a whole language associated with patient care that you may never have heard before. Don't be surprised if each nurse tells you something a little different. Some things are different every day, and some nurses explain things in a different way. If you're not understanding what's being said to you, ask, and ask again.
The medical team is required to offer you any and all treatment available for the patient's condition. That doesn't mean the patient must accept all treatment offered. It will be your role as the substitute decision maker to filter out all the choices offered to you and accept only the treatments that that patient would accept if they were willing to speak for themselves. Don't hesitate to ask the medical team whether they feel the treatments being offered will match what you believe the patient's wishes to be. Many treatments require signed consent from the patient or the substitute decision maker. You can give this consent over the telephone if you're not able to be present in the room to sign that piece of paper. Sudden unexpected changes in status of the patient might require transfer to another center in another city. The substitute decision maker is unlikely to be given a choice of where the patient would transfer to. Years ago, we would send people to Buffalo, and then the family would have to get down there to visit. That would be the first bed available, so we would take it. Bed and specialist availability dictates where the patient will go. However, as the substitute decision maker, you should consider how much aggressive treatment the patient would desire. Would the patient prefer to be given all aggressive treatments, wherever that may be available, or would they prefer to receive comfort measures closer to home? These are tough choices for someone to make.
Although it's not required to be in writing, if you have been legally appointed as the patient's power of attorney for personal care, make a photocopy of the document and leave it with the patient's chart. Please don't leave your original copy. It'll be extremely difficult to get it back. You may have been given a scheduled time to meet with the physician, either in person or on the phone. Feel free to bring along a couple of family members. You can even do it by Zoom. More ears hear more. Before the meeting, think about what you'd like to ask and bring written notes with you. Trust me, you're going to have 5 questions in your mind and only remember 2 of them. The medical team has a lot of sick people to care for, so the time they are available to talk to is limited. If you're well prepared, you will get more value for that time.
As the patient is being admitted into their hospital bed, there is a tentative discharge date assigned to the chart. The substitute decision maker could then potentially be meeting with discharge planners to work towards that discharge date. It is critical that if you are in the role of SDM, you have the patient's wishes clearly in focus, as well as awareness of any challenges that may come from interested parties, such as other family members. In addition, if you are not the financial power of attorney, as well, you will have to work in partnership with that person, because finances may drive some of your decisions that you make, such as which nursing home you would go to, which long-term care, which retirement home. There are many resources available to you. Most hospital units have a social worker who is an excellent resource if you need help with notes to miss work, funding for equipment, a place for you to stay if you're from out of town, things like that. There is a hospital chaplain available to you for religious support and moral support. You can bring your own religious leader with you. The staff will not give that person detailed information without your consent. They will just give very brief information. Each family is unique. We are not the Waltons. We are not the Cleaver family that you see on TV. We are very unique. We are very human. If there are people who should not be allowed to visit, give the nurse a list of those names. They will try to restrict the visiting the best they can. If there are people who are not relatives, but are extremely important to that patient's comfort and well-being, give those names to the staff also, so they will be allowed to visit. Visiting can be regulated in some departments like intensive care units or infant and children departments, but not as easily out on the general wards.
So find out what time the shifts change. Try to avoid visiting during that time or calling for information. Ask a receptionist or volunteer if there are specific visiting hours, if there's discounted parking, where the visitor's washroom is, where to get food and drink. You're going to be tired, you may be overwhelmed and stressed during this time. Remember, the reason you've been selected to be substitute decision maker is because you have a close bond with this person. Take care of yourself. Accept help when it's offered. This person has trusted you with a precious responsibility to speak for them if they're not able to. It can be difficult, so seek out the resources that are available at the hospital as a support.
You guys are good. You did that in under 10 minutes.
Hey.
We are very impressed. Now, I just want to turn to Susan and Wanda because we don't have any questions in the chat room, and because the two of you have also been involved in hospital settings, is there anything else that you would add to the comments that Deb and Lynn have made about what to expect?
Patti, I won't add anything, but in fact, the story I'm about to tell, which is my own story, we experienced many of the things that the two of them talked about.
That's great.
About 2 years ago, my husband and I experienced a serious health crisis and understand in much better ways the issues. I had a routine CAT scan and they found a small tumor on my pancreas. I felt fine, no symptoms. Went through a series of tests, pretty sure it was benign and probably didn't need action, but they ordered an endoscopic ultrasound to confirm the diagnosis. The morning of the test was a great day. I went to the gym, I ran errands, we zipped off to Hamilton for the test. I was sedated and so was dozy and went home and go to bed. I woke up in the most incredible pain I've ever felt. My husband in a panic said, "What should I do?" I said, "Call an ambulance." That was the last thing I remember for 7 weeks. The test has a 3% chance of complications. And what I had was severe pancreatitis onslaught that followed kidney failure, neurological symptoms that my family described as terrifying. I went septic twice. I had a whole series. I couldn't absorb nutrients. In those 7 weeks, I was not unconscious, but I was totally incapable of making any kinds of decisions or even communicating in a rational way that they could understand. After those 7 weeks, I had recurring problems. I couldn't walk, I couldn't move, but over the next 3.5 months, in and out of hospitals, I started the recovery process. My husband of 50 years and I had never really talked about the detail of if one of us became ill. And why would we? We were healthy, we were traveling, we were both still working. Our life was great. We did have a will, we did have powers of attorney for healthcare, and we felt we were prepared. My husband had little knowledge of hospitals or the healthcare environment. He's never been in hospital himself. He wasn't familiar with medical terminology, just as Lynn and Deb talked about. All those things that would be helpful to know, we didn't know. He was suddenly thrown into an environment with the person he loved, severely ill, with things changing hourly over those weeks. He didn't even know the questions he should be asking the medical people. And because the symptoms were unpredictable and severe, the medical personnel didn't necessarily agree. And so he had to take that information, ask questions, and figure out what might be the best for me given an uncertain outcome. The lessons here: a health crisis can occur at any age and situations where everything is just fine. It's not just about people nearing death. Even though he was my substitute decision maker, he wasn't prepared, nor could he have been, for the complications and the quick learning that he had to do. He had to find the right personnel. Who could help him understand and advise him. As Deb mentioned, not everyone approaches it the same way. Not everyone can relate to you and what you're experiencing. And he found that he had to find people who he could relate to and understand. I'm always the 20 questions person in the family, and suddenly he had to become the questioner because there weren't clear answers. And acting in my best interest, he wanted to understand what the decision might mean. What he did know, and I'm thankful for that, is that I wouldn't want to give up at that point in time. And so every question and every conversation, he was thinking in terms of my best interest. And I'm so thankful he did that, because even though it was scary, our story has a happy ending. None of us can predict what can happen. And while mine was happy, having an SDM who did know me and could understand and think through what I might want was a big help. If we had it to do over again, we'd do a lot of the things Deb and Lynn talked about. But we learned a lot from this process. It can happen to us at any time.
Thanks very much, Susan. The personal stories really do make a difference, that's for sure. Our question that Susan and Wanda were focusing on was around the role of the SDM in a hospital setting. But just before I move to ask Wanda to comment, we do have a question that came in regarding Deb and Lynn's presentation at the beginning. And it really asks the question that staff are so busy that they don't necessarily have time to share information. And this particular individual is going through an experience with her mom, who is really struggling. And the bottom line questions are, does the patient need to be deemed incompetent to allow for our participation in the discharge and planning and moves, etc.? And also, is a medical power of attorney the same as an SDM? Now, I can answer those questions really quickly. Yes, power of attorney, substitute decision maker, same thing. You need to be deemed incompetent before your substitute decision maker can assist you. But from the nurses on the panel, I'd really like your opinion about how do family handle that when the person is in and out of consciousness. Sometimes they're capable of making decisions, sometimes they're not. How do nursing staff turn to substitute decision makers and the family members to help them? Wanda, do you want to start? Or Lynn?
I can
hand up
briefly on that one. That how do you cope when the patient is in and out? It depends on what the decision is. If it's a more simple decision and the patient, you feel they can understand the consequences of their decisions, they can make the decision. The next day, they may not be able to make decisions. The family member or the SDM will be asked to help make the decision, but as long as the patient can give the answers, The patient is in the driver's seat. I'm both a nurse and an SDM for my father, who is completely competent. But when he gets sick, he gets overwhelmed and wants help making decisions. It's more of a guidance than me making his decisions. It's just saying, okay, Dad, we could do it this way, this will happen. We could do it this way and this will happen. Which is best for you? So it flows. That's not a great answer for the question, but that is the answer. It flows back and forth.
And I think that gets at the essence of this question, because there is confusion and everybody's busy and trying to communicate. Wanda, go ahead, please.
I would just add to that, one of the things, I don't know whether anybody had intended to talk about it today, but we encourage people to do the power of attorney papers to make someone their substitute decision maker, but also to write like a letter if you were telling the substitute decision maker what you want and what you need, what's your value of life, just to, not too long, but so that's in paper as well. And it doesn't get handed into the hospital, but if there's a question in the hospital or in long-term care about whether she really means she wants open heart surgery or not, and you know that's not the thing, if you have that letter signed by her and show it to them, it helps to make everybody comfortable with the decisions that you might be pushing, even though your mom or your dad can still talk, or it clarifies the air.
As long as we understand that those written understandings are not part of the law in Ontario in terms of directives to doctors, that the direction comes through the patient, and if they're not capable, then the substitute decision maker. And I hope that all of you have had a look at the hierarchy, because we'll talk a little bit about how those twists and turns can make a difference when you haven't chosen an SDM. Deb, I see your hand.
Yes, just one other additional thing. Because I spent so much time in my career in a management role, families and substitute decision makers, sometimes when they're not getting the answers they feel they're entitled to, if there's confusion around the care path, if there's a sense that wishes aren't being attended to, it generates anger sometimes. And the best plan forward at that point is not to sit and brew or be angry. It's to take it up to the next level. There is a manager, a nursing manager assigned to every single unit. If you feel your issues are not being met, if your communication issues are muddled, please, please, please take it up to the next level. If the nurse manager can't facilitate some kind of meeting of minds, she can certainly facilitate a meeting. A get-together with the key players. If you're still not satisfied, you go up the next level. There's always a patient advocate or a patient complaints person at every hospital. She or he can intervene and pull together the team and say, okay, can we all get on the same pathway here? So it's a very complicated structure, the hospital, but it's quite hierarchical. And you always have an opportunity as a family member, as a substitute decision maker, if you feel that your issues are not being addressed, to take it up a level until you feel satisfied.
Thanks, Deb. That's good advice. Now, as usual, this team has gone totally off of our agenda. Just, the way we operate all the time. Our second question, which we're supposed to have answered by now, and I want to make sure we do cover it, was going to be answered by Susan and Wanda, and that is, what is the role of the substitute decision maker in a hospital? I think we've covered much of that as we've had this discussion and so on, but I don't want to take away from the comments that Wanda and Susan were going to make in this area. So Wanda, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and Susan, I believe you've gone through your story with a lot of good comments, and I appreciate all of your outlook on it from the point of view of a patient. How much time have we got, Patti?
Oh, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to really briefly tell you a story about a young student from Guatemala who stayed with us while he was attending Conestoga College, or beginning that process. And he ended up staying with us for 6 months, and then deciding he wanted to stay in Canada, moving out on his own, where we still had frequent contact with him, and getting a good job after he finished his courses. And he's moved to another city as well now, but we've had contact with him throughout that off and on. He contracted COVID from a work colleague in the spring. He got very ill at that time, was testing negative for quite a while, and then eventually got a positive test for COVID, but his symptoms didn't go away. He developed extreme fatigue. He couldn't walk. He started working from home all the time, even though they weren't required to. And he'd applied for landed immigrant status. He wants to stay in Canada. He doesn't have very many close friends, and he has no family here. His family are at home. They don't speak English, most of them. So he's in the position of not knowing what he should do. If he goes back home, he won't have good health care. He won't have money to pay for it. Now he at least has benefits. He's still working from home. But he's in a situation that he's really ended up with no substitute decision maker that's going to work well for him. He has eventually asked us to act as his next of kin or substitute decision maker, and we have his brother's contact information to pass information on to him. But thinking about this, what this would entail, there's a whole cultural difference, which we became very aware of when he was here, how they talk about things, whether they don't talk about that or they don't raise difficult decisions. And I felt like he treated us like his parents who didn't want to hear about the bad things that were happening. They only want to know when it's good. All of those would affect how he would talk to the medical system if he ended up in hospital, and also how he would talk to us. I have a sense of what he might want in terms of treatment, but we haven't actually had that full discussion because I don't think, I've pushed him quite a bit, and he talks to me because I'm a nurse, but he still doesn't tell me all of the things that I think it would be good for us to know. So these kinds of decision-making processes can be, this is a sort of an emphasis on it, but it can be is true for families in Canada as well. There's so many things that fall into that decision-making process that it's good to think about it ahead of time and have some conversations with your SDM.
Susan, did you want to add anything to that?
I would only add that it would be nice to have a list of what the SDM does and the decisions they have to make. But in fact, every situation is fluid, and everyone you're working with, as we've suggested, are busy and have their own perspective, from a nurse's perspective, from a specialist perspective, from a hospitalist perspective. So the SDM needs to be a good questioner, a good listener, and know the wishes, if possible, of the person, know who that person is. In my case, at least he knew me. If he knew nothing else, he knew me and he could make that decision. Now we have more conversations about it, and that's good, but you can never anticipate what the situation might be. You can only have those general guidelines in most situations. Thanks, Patty.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to add to that at all? We don't have any other questions, but I do want you to know, if you haven't been following the chat room, that the answer that you gave to the question posed by Rosalind was very well received and appreciated. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to move on to question number 3. We've touched on this a little bit, but I know that Deb and Wanda want to expand on a little bit more. What are the characteristics of an effective substitute decision maker? We've talked a little bit about their role, we've talked about the hospital setting, but what are the characteristics that make a substitute decision maker really effective? Not quite sure which one of you wanted to start on this one. Deb, can I call on you?
Sure, you can. Again, another story. As we've discovered over the years, telling stories is often the most effective way of getting out the information. I was given the gift from both my parents, the gift of conversation. So as they aged, we regularly had conversations about what their wishes would be. My mom, it was a fairly comfortable, easy conversation. My dad, it was like pulling teeth. But we had the conversation. So when the time came, it made things a little bit easier for me to responsibly and with as much focus as I could make the choices that were really hard. And the example I would like to tell you about. And it goes back to the question that was in the chat room earlier around what do you do when cognition seems to drift? When we all know as nurses that lack of sleep, an unusual environment like the hospital, unaddressed pain, communication style, all affect a person's ability to really understand what's being said to them. In the scenario with my mom, she was an 85-year-old who had experienced a fall and a hip fracture, a subsequent surgery that didn't go well. She was in a chronic pain situation in a rehab facility, but clearly things weren't going well. And a physician recommended to her that she go on to dialysis. The scenario that Mom and I had talked about before was that she was keen not to have big interventions. That's the way she called it, big interventions that would extend her life if in fact it didn't look like she would be able to return to an independent living situation where she could invite people in for tea and have conversations and read a book and generally have what she referred to as a good quality of life. But when the physician recommended dialysis, she immediately fell back into, of course, doctor, whatever you think's right, which is very traditional for her age and stage. And the fact that, as I said, her cognitive abilities at that point, because of all of the extraneous things that were going on with her health, was compromised. It wasn't my position to make the choice for her at that point. My responsibility was to remind her of what her previous decision was, to more fully explain what dialysis was and what it would mean for her in terms of her daily existence, and to make it clear to her that it would not in any way improve the expectation that she would return to her previous existence. And her response immediately after that was, well, of course I don't want that. So there again, we go back to the encourager rule. And it's best done by someone who really understands what the patient wanted before their current health crisis and what they want after their current health crisis. Lynn?
Thanks, Deb. Sorry, Wanda, you wanted to add to this one, right?
Yeah. How much have we got time for time?
Oh, we're fine. We're
Okay.
good. You guys are really doing well now.
We can talk fast when we need to. I'm going to just tell you a quick story about my dad. He was a wheat farmer in Saskatchewan, farmed on his own on the farm until age 75 after my brother had gone away to university. So he was pretty independent and pretty active for a long time. We never had a talk about dying, but from conversations with other folks who we knew who were in long-term care in hospital, we were pretty sure we knew what he would or wouldn't want. I was living in Toronto at the time, and my brother was in the States, in Georgia. So, and my sisters were out in Vancouver. So there was nobody actually there. And when he ended up in hospital, my brother and I were out a couple of times, as my brother was the substitute decision maker, but we were pretty in sync about how we wanted things done and knew what Dad would want. He basically, he was in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, but he basically just stopped eating and drinking. He stopped talking to people. And this was over a fairly short period of time. And my sense was that he'd had his 90th birthday party and he didn't want to be there anymore. He was done. And ending up in the hospital confirmed that for him, I think. I spent some time sitting with him, and as he sort of deteriorated, and I'd been back and forth a couple of times to visit, I thought he was up in the chair one day, and my dad had two indulgences that he allowed himself, and that was peppermint patties and vanilla ice cream. Vanilla, please, if you don't mind. And if I knew he would enjoy some vanilla ice cream, so he hadn't been, everybody was fussing because he wasn't drinking or he wasn't eating anything, and what could they get him? So I went and got a little dish of vanilla ice cream, and I went back and sat with him, and I said, okay, Dad, here's a little treat for you. And I took a spoon and put it near his mouth. He took it into his mouth and it promptly came right back out. And I thought, okay, if he doesn't want his vanilla ice cream, he's done with everything. And it was just sort of a marker for me that of his state of mind. And I'm pretty sure that that was right. I did talk with some of the staff pretty clearly at that time. That was the last time that I was there with my dad. I had to come back to work, and I chatted with the staff, and a couple of days later we got a call that he had died. So their issues were, he kept pulling out his IV, and I had late night phone calls about what could they put it back in or what should they do. And I'm thinking, why is it even there? We already discussed this. And I understand that urge to do the things that they feel would help him. But he was also making some decisions, and I knew if they put it back in, it would keep coming out. Just leave him be so he's comfortable. And we got that for him in the end. And fortunately, it wasn't a long time that he had to exist in that state of tussling about what we should do. So to be effective, your substitute decision maker has to know what was important for you and has to be able to advocate for that. They have to be able to understand your wishes and to ask questions about that, so that you've talked about how that plays out in real life. If possible, they have to be willing to ask difficult questions of the medical team and the staff caring for you. And they also have to be able to understand the pros and cons of decisions that are being proposed by the medical team. How well is this going to work? What are the chances of them achieving the life that they want to have? And also to question the possibilities of whether there's going to be a positive outcome from a treatment or a surgery or whatever it is. How much quality of life are they going to have in the end? So that's mine.
Thanks, Wanda. I really appreciate that. And again, you guys have sort of pulled it together, and we're staying really well on time. We've got one last question, which will take us about 10 minutes. But before we move on, because we've been talking specifically about the characteristics, any further comments from any of the other panelists? Susan.
Yes. Something Wanda said reminded me of a situation my husband described to me in the same situation I told you about earlier. The doctors didn't know me. They knew a person in the bed. And because of my neurological symptoms, I was crazy. I said crazy things. I did crazy things. I don't remember any of this. But one doctor came to my husband and said, she has brain damage. Oh. And that was based on what they were observing, to which my husband assured this was not the person he knew. This was not me in my healthy state. There was something else, which they did determine was because of the incredible pain, which I couldn't express. It was causing hallucinations and other things. So the SDM ideally knows the person. The doctors and the nurses, however competent and wonderful they are, only know that part that they see when the person is ill. And that's why that role of SDM, just as with you and your father, is so critically important. Thanks.
Actually, Susan, that's a great segue into our final question. And because all of you have worked in those hospital settings, I'm sure you've seen this. What kind of confusion have you seen when it comes to the role of the SDM and your experiences within healthcare? And Susan and Lynn were going to respond to this one. So then why don't we start with you, since Susan just commented a minute ago.
Actually, Susan, do you want to tell your story about your lovely family that you met?
Sure. We generally have a pretty healthy family, so these two examples do not express all we are, but the story that I'd like to relate is on two levels. Our early 40s son was rushed to hospital with a health scare and was put in an induced coma while they determined what was happening. Because he was in his 40s and had been healthy, he didn't have a power of attorney, hadn't considered it, as many young men or young people in that age group do. And under the hierarchy, his parents, my husband and I, and his 19-year-old son, our grandson, were equally his SDMs. We had a close relationship, and our grandson spent a lot of time with us, so it made it easier. And yet, it was incredibly difficult. the perspective we had for our son as parents was very different than that 19-year-old who was desperate to do nothing but keep his father there and alive. And we talked through the kinds of issues that we needed to talk through, but it wasn't easy. Our younger son actually came in to help when it became so emotional and so intense for each of us that we didn't have a very good perspective. And it was only because we kept communicating that we were able to work through and make the best decisions for our son. But what made it more difficult in that particular situation in the ICU for over a 4-day period was what was happening with another family. Also a young man, I'm not sure what he was there for, but his family was there the whole time in the intensive care waiting room, or the facility, the room itself. I understand he did not have an SDM or a power of attorney, so all 5 of his siblings were equally the power of attorney. His parents were older and were confused and were not capable of taking the role that they might have done. During that period of time, they argued, they fought, they yelled. They had to be removed by security from the ICU waiting room at least 3 times. It was painful to watch, but more importantly, it was incredibly difficult for the medical personnel who were trying to get decisions made for the person in the bed. They couldn't get the same information. And everything seemed to deteriorate when they had tried to have discussion. For us in the next room with our son, I cannot tell you how stressful it was. We were already in difficulty, but hearing this just made it unbearable sometimes. And finally, for the family itself, you could hear them playing out all of that dysfunction because no one could make the decision. We luckily left intensive care before that family and that individual did. So I don't know the outcome. I only know that by not being prepared and by not having thought through this, it made a bad situation so much worse. And it reminded me that families are families. We had this conversation earlier. Things happen, but it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened to anyone there. And most importantly, for the doctors and nurses that were just trying to do the best for that patient. It was painful to watch. Lynn, you wanted to go from there.
I worked in intensive care as a nurse for about 500 years, I think. And many families, like Susan's family that was the Waltons, and like the family she mentioned that was not the Waltons, that you'd meet everything and everything in between. And it is very difficult as the caregiver walking on broken glass around family situations and trying to make these people be at peace. Families have to go home and live with this forever. This is not going away for them. I went home to my family at the end of the day and everything was as it should be most days. Those families went home to a broken family and fighting every day, or to, in Susan's case, they went home every day to a family that was not broken, but stressed. So the family needs all the preparation they can get, all the tools that you can give them to help make decisions and be at peace with themselves. And also appoint an alternate. I just had a little story came up yesterday. My sister-in-law and I are co-substitute decision makers for my dad. We work beautifully together. We're always on the same page of what to do, how to do it, when he does need decisions made. Yesterday, she had a crisis on the other side of her family with an aunt and uncle that she is the sole decision maker for them. And one of them has become very ill and has become palliative quite suddenly. So she said to me, like, we're doing a couple little things for my dad right now. She said, I just can't cope. So it's yours for now. All the stuff with dad is for me right now. She's out of the picture. Always have an alternate, just in case something like that comes up. So that's just an aside. My 2 favorite stories of families coming out of ICU started off the same. Both were couples in their 70s. The man in both couples was the patient that we had. The first one, this had to be 25 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. A man in his 70s had a massive stroke. He had no hope of recovery whatsoever. We as a medical team were promoting to the family that we make him palliative and just let him be at peace and die peacefully and gracefully. His family insisted that we continue with life support, that we have all kinds of medical interventions that we did on him. Even though we kept telling them there is no hope of recovery, the man could not hear, see, speak, understand, nothing. He was on life support continuously. That's the only way he could breathe and stay alive. So we always ask the family, is this what the patient would want? If he could speak for himself, would he agree to all of this? And this particular wife said, no, he would not want all of this. So then question number 2 is always, why are we doing this to this man? And her reply was, he didn't want this, but I want this. I am making the decisions. I want him kept alive on all of this life support because I say so. Okay, fine. But we did that for 2 years. We kept that man alive artificially against his will in an intensive care unit for 2 years. The next family, and you can see why 25 years later I'd remember that one. The next family was not too many years ago. A man with a terminal illness, but was coping, suddenly became very ill with a different, I think he had a heart attack on top of his terminal illness. Ended up coming to emerge. The doctor said to the wife, do you want everything done? And that's kind of a common question to ask. Well, what's everything mean? That's what you need as the substitute decision maker. You need to ask the questions. What do you mean by everything? Do you mean life support? Do you mean dialysis? Do you mean surgery? Do you mean painkillers? What do you mean by everything? So of course the wife was a lovely woman. She said, of course, do everything for my husband. A couple of days later, I was looking after him and the wife and I sat down and had a chat. Now, working in intensive care, I did consider it a luxury to spend time with the families. The one question before was, it's hard to get a hold of the nurses or doctors to ask questions. And out on the regular floors, it is very difficult. In intensive care, I was in the room with one patient and one family and could spend time talking to them as I was working. So I said to his wife, again, the same 2 questions. Is this what he would want? And she said, absolutely not. When he was diagnosed with his terminal illness, he called a family meeting. He was a businessman. He called a family meeting and said, this is what I will accept for treatment. This is what I will not accept for treatment. Patti, time, we're
Getting close, just giving you a heads up.
Okay, thanks. And what he would not accept for treatment was life support, artificial life support. So question number 2, why are we doing this? His wife said, when the doctor asked me if I want everything done for my husband, I couldn't say no. I love him. I couldn't say no. I felt awful saying no. So he had fortunately written down his wishes. She went home and got that piece of paper with his wishes written down. Her and I read it together. And I could physically see her doing this. The weight just went off of her shoulders. All of a sudden, she could remember everything her husband had said to her. And all of a sudden, it was his wishes, not her having to say, I don't want you to keep him alive any longer. It was his wishes saying, I would not wish to be kept alive artificially against my will. So we could remove him from life support and keep him comfortable as per his wishes.
That's great, Lynn. No, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And we don't have any questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Shelley, because when we get into our smaller discussion groups, we'll have an opportunity for people to really build on the stories you've heard so far, but also to talk about our scenario that we're going to review. So Shelley, it's back to you.
Okay. I think there is one question, but maybe we can see afterwards if it.
Oh, I just see it now.
Addressed. Do you want to try and do that one, or do you want to go to the groups?
Let's go to the groups, because I do want to make sure we have good discussion. But Rosalind, we will not leave this question because it's a really good one.
Okay. Okay, so this is the part for everyone where you get to chat with each other, discuss the scenario in a small group. The scenario I sent out to everyone ahead of time, and it's also included in the chat. You can download it if you go to the chat, if you don't have a copy in front of you. Each of our lovely panel members is going to take on the job of facilitating the small group discussion, and it's great size because there's about 5 people in each group. We're going to give you about 20 minutes to talk about the scenario, and I'll let each of the moderators, each of the facilitators share the questions that they have with you as they go along. You'll have 20 minutes. You'll get a notice close to the 20-minute mark that we're going to be shutting down the sessions, and we'll bring you back to the full group. So I'm going to send you now. Enjoy yourselves. Hi. They're in breakout session, so I'm just waiting. How'd it go out there?
Good.
Yeah? Yeah, I heard you say, oh, this is great, or this is it, or whatever you said as I was leaving. So they got it lined up properly?
Yeah, no, the angle's good, but then the drawings Van Harten gave had the house way too high. I said, guys, we're not doing that. So I had to call the engineer and a bunch of stuff, and it's going to be a bit higher than I'd like,
Yeah.
but it was going to be 3 feet higher.
Well, how did that get missed? Like, how did
Well,
they?
no, it's in, like you see everything, but until you see the elevations.
Oh, yeah. So it's like it wasn't that they missed it. We
No,
missed
nobody
it.
missed it. It's
Oh.
just, so you're out there
Yeah.
and you're looking at things and you go, oh, holy shit.
Does that affect the approval? Like we have
No,
to go?
no. Going ahead. But it would have affected the septic. So,
Man, it's a good thing you're out there.
yeah. Well, already it's done it.
Yeah. No. So how was Eric? No, Rick. How was Rick? He seemed a bit annoyed this morning. Ugh. You've got the scones in the freezer.
I mentioned to Diane, have an outbreak in my dad's home, so that's distracted me and taken a bit of my time. I'm feeling
Yeah.
this morning, Dad, but if anything's ever said, just know that I told them, they have an outbreak there.
That's so funny. Because Brendan doesn't want them to ask him to work tomorrow, so he's wondering what story he could tell them if they ask him to work. And we were talking about your dad. She looking for you? just going back on and to finish up in 1 minute. Got everybody back?
Are we all there?
They're coming.
Twists and turns really helped us prolong the conversation in our group.
Excellent.
How'd it go for
Excellent.
everyone else?
Oh, we had no trouble prolonging the conversation.
I take it that means it was a great conversation. I'm glad you guys had some time to talk this through. We have about 5 minutes left, so if there's anything that people want to ask, feel
Shelley,
free to
can I
unmute
take us back to that question we didn't answer?
Yeah, if we can just stick with the session, the discussion first, and then we'll go back to the
Great. Okay.
just while it's top of mind. If there's anything out of the small group discussion that you wanted to raise, anything? Otherwise, we'll go back to the other.
We exhausted all the questions in our discussions.
Okay. Okay. I do see something about a lot of interest in the Deborah and Lynn. Yep, just
Grace?
in your, yep, just a minute. Deborah and Lynn, in this material you presented at the beginning, so maybe we can share that afterwards. Grace, you had a question? You're muted, Grace.
Unmute.
Shelley, can you unmute her? Oh, great.
Can you hear me?
Guys.
Yes.
If you've got beneficiaries, do you still need a substitute decision maker?
Who would like to answer that?
I can take that. Beneficiaries is your things. Substitute decision maker is you, your health, your well-being, your care. The beneficiaries.
While you're alive.
Yes. The beneficiaries that you're appointing your will, that's when you're dead. What we're talking about is while you're still alive, all those days that you're not dead.
Okay. Okay. And I think I'm alive.
I think so.
That
Patty?
segues nicely into the question that was posted because it talks about power of attorney, substitute decision makers, and validity and so on. And yes, going to a lawyer is a good way to ensure that you have a substitute decision maker named. You can also download off the internet, as long as it's from Ontario, forms that allow you to name someone. But if you just decide randomly in the hospital, I'm the substitute decision maker, and the patient has not appointed you, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. That's a short and sweet answer.
Yeah, the only way that, so the question was, the mom had intended to have 2 daughters named as in a power of attorney document, and one of them was out of the country, so the other one was formally named in a POA document. So now that the 2 daughters are back together, the daughter is wondering if mom can just verbally share who she wants to be her substitute decision makers, and that would be the 2 of them, is what she would like. But if you look at the hierarchy, the power of attorney document is, other than going to court, is the highest rank. So that will always be the highest one that the healthcare system is going to go to, as opposed to 2 siblings that where there is no power of attorney in place. But the power of attorney document, the mom could revoke it, and then it would fall to the 2 daughters if there is nobody else, or she can rewrite it, but she cannot verbally change a power of attorney document. Anybody wanting to add anything to that?
As something that came up in our discussions around, I use the example, I have 2 sons and they are both listed as my power of attorney. Increasingly, I feel one son will have a much harder time with the decision making than the other. Although they're close, they talk, I'm not concerned about that, but I have debated talking to the 2 of them about whether one son should be designated with the other son as an alternate. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that conversation. No. But I think it's an important one to have and get their feelings on it, so that I know that it's not putting too much pressure on one and yet not taking away something that he feels he wants to be involved in. Yeah. So, but right now, the power of attorney states they're both equal. So. Yeah,
and there's been a movement towards naming alternates. So if one is not available, then the other one would step up. You can always, it's voluntary. So even if you're named in a power of attorney document, you don't want to be that person, you just say no, and they have to move on the ranking. They can't just say, well, I want it to be so-and-so instead. And there's the option of going to an estate planner if you're not comfortable with the idea of a lawyer, where it might be more expensive. The estate planner can do a lot of this legwork, all of these discussions with you ahead of time, and then just hands it to a lawyer to authenticate it at the end of the day. So that's another way to do it. And as Patti talked about, there are some online tools, and we did talk earlier this year about the program that Community Legal Education has, which is an online tool where you could make up your name and just walk through it in terms of preparing your powers of attorney and your will, and you get a printout at the end that then you can then go and get authenticated. But it's actually a great process, even just in terms of the kinds of questions it asks you to consider. And I can send that out to you in follow-up after the session's over with. I think there's one more question there, Patti.
No, it's just, I have to leave. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So, well, on that note,
Can
yeah,
I just add one?
You want to say something?
It's important to review this regularly.
Yeah.
As we age, our wishes change. We went through, I had appointed my husband legally as my power of attorney, and he's on the hierarchy anyway. But my alternate, when we went through family health issues, I watched how my alternate responded, and I didn't like it. So I thought, okay, you're not my alternate anymore. And I chose another one based on how that one responded in a health crisis. So review, always review.
Excellent point. Excellent point to end it on. So this is the end of our second in the series. Grace, did you have one more question?
Yeah, it's more of a, excuse me, more of a comment. I just want to thank you ladies for such powerful information. And most of what you've said, working in the health field, I knew that, but this was so good reminders, plus some more additional information. So thank you.
Good to hear.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
Those are lovely words, and these women deserve it wholeheartedly because of all the work they put into it and their passion for this topic. So thank you on behalf of Hospice for all you do for us. This has been recorded, so once we clean it up and take out some of the comments that we said at the beginning, or trying to get ourselves organized, we'll clean it up and we'll have it available and send it out in a link. Our last session in this series will be in November, and we are looking at, we had named it, What's There to Talk About, You and Your SDM. So we really want to finish this off with, okay, so what do you talk about? What do you need to share with each other in order to prepare an SDM? And I'll send you the information on that as well. So I think that's it. Anything you ladies want to add as a last thought as we close it up? Oh, sorry, Rosalind.
One quick question. I didn't know about the previous one. Is there access to that anywhere? Okay.
It's on the hospice website as well, and
Okay.
on the advanced care planning website. So I'll send you the links to both when I send out.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And could I have it as well, please?
yeah, I'll send it to everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You ladies want to stay on and let me know?
Yes, we'll stay.
That was wonderful. A really good.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.